Good morning. Welcome to this morning's event, America in the Age of MLK, Teaching the Civil Rights Movement in Schools. I'm Jim Sturgis, Executive Director of Pioneer Institute. I welcome all of you to this morning's session. We're going to get underway right now because we want to make sure we have ample time for the program. It is a pretty packed program. I'd like to start by thanking our co-sponsors of this morning's discussion, the Program on Education Policy and Governance at the Kennedy School, the Black Alliance for Educational Options, the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at the Harvard Law School, the Concord Review, We the People, Citizenship First, the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, and the Mass Historical Society. We appreciate your co-sponsorship this morning. I'd also like to thank our speakers. Good morning, Commissioner. Many of whom have traveled here for this important discussion on U.S. history instruction. I'd like to also thank Jamie Gass for his work in organizing this morning's conversation. A few brief remarks just to open up. I think anyone who's remotely familiar with Dr. King's work and his speeches knows how heavily he drew upon the intellectual, legal, and religious roots of the West and the United States to make his case for civil rights. One of the major reasons why he was so effective is he knew about and spent decades educating all Americans about the rights residing within our founding documents. To say that these rights were often neglected is being ridiculously generous to our past. They were violated and abused by public officials, as MLK wrote in his I Have a Dream speech. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. MLK's work was, in essence, to save the soul of America, and he did it with an off-the-charts ability to communicate his ideas, also to articulate ideas in his own head, but also to match that with immense courage. His ideas were forged at the fire of knowledge of U.S. history and American law, where the light made clear the burning mismatch between the words on the promissory note and the reality in America. Having children in the public school, being a dad, I'm always taken aback a little when we get to January, which ushers in the annual celebrations of Dr. King's work, often with viewings of videos and the singing of songs, whereas the next generation is truly taught precious little about the touchstones for MLK's words, whether foundational documents, those promissory notes, or even the Emancipation Proclamation. In order for us and our children to understand our history and be citizens in the model of MLK, we too need to understand and communicate our history deeply in a way that moves the heart, yes, but also the mind, to keep advancing the progress of freedom in this American experiment. Progress and freedom are why, sometimes controversially, as researchers and advocates of high-quality and proven school choice options for parents, Pioneer has for 25 years pushed the public conversation around education forward on public charter schools. Researchers from Harvard, MIT, Duke, Stanford report, an independent piece of research after independent piece of research, that Massachusetts charters are among the best public schools in the country and are closing achievement gaps more effectively than any schools in the country. But making good on an educational promissory note is not just about increasing parental freedom. It's about high-quality instruction in English, math, science, and yes, U.S. history. Specifically, in recent years, Pioneer has actively promoted rigorous, content-based academic standards that include U.S. history and civics instruction. We've published numerous reports, transcripts, and videos on the lack of understanding of U.S. history that has resulted from the current neglect of teaching it in our public schools. This morning's event is one in a series of engagements with the best minds and most highly reputed historians in the country, all geared to show policymakers and educators and the general public what's possible and what we must expect of our children. We've hosted numerous events featuring Pulitzer Prize-winning U.S. historians and nationally recognized experts, including Dr. Gordon Wood on the revolutionary and founding eras, Dr. James McPherson on the Civil War, Dr. Jack Rokoff and Dr. Howard Dobson on the founders and slavery, Edie Hirsch on academic content, core knowledge and schooling, and presidential speechwriters and historians like Jeff Schessel, Willard Stern Randall, Ron Powers, Jocelyn Chadwick. It is why we are profoundly and humbly grateful to be here with Bob Moses, Taylor Branch, Diane McWhorter, and an outstanding panel of experts. So let's jump into the program. It is my pleasure, Bob, if you want to make your way to the podium, to introduce Robert P. Moses. Bob Moses was the director of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's Mississippi Project from 1961 to 64, directed the Council of Federated Organizations from 62 to 64, directed the Council of Federated Organizations, and was pivotal organizer for the Mississippi Summer Project of 1964. He is the author of Radical Equations, Civil Rights from Mississippi to the Algebra Project, and co-editor of The Quality Education as a Constitutional Right. In 2011-2012, Moses was a distinguished visitor for the Center for African American Studies at Princeton University. He is a visiting lecturer at NYU School of Law, as well as founder and president of the Algebra Project, Inc. Robert, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thanks, Jim. So Jim was talking about founding documents, so I'd like us to do something together. So if you could repeat it after me, the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. In the early darkness of a winter evening in February 1963, Jimmy Travis slipped behind the wheel and Randolph Blackwell crowded me beside him in a SNCC Chevy in front of the voter registration office in Greenwood, Mississippi, to take off for Greenville on US 82 straight across the Delta. Jimmy zigzagged out of town to escape an unmarked car, but as we headed west on 82, it trailed us and swept past near the turnoff for Valley State University, firing automatic weapons, pitting the Chevy with bullets. Jimmy cried out and slumped. I reached over to grab the wheel, fumbled for the brakes as we glided off 82 into the ditch, our windows blown out, a bullet caught in Jimmy's neck. So what I want to do is relate that little story to the issue of we the people and raise some questions about what happened 50 years ago and what is happening now. One thing I would like us to do is to think not about what the preamble says, but about what it did and what it does. So the preamble established a national political community, a kind of we the people class of people. In 1787, that was primarily white male property owners. And what we can say is an accomplishment and perhaps an indication of real progress is that the country across the last couple of 100 years has managed to extend the reach of that we the people class. And if I think about the country and how it has to work to change really the big ticket issue of we are a country that started out with both freedom and slavery, then I think that what we have to do is keep working on the we the people side. We have the federal government on the one hand and states on the other, but we also have we the people. And if I think what was happening in Mississippi with Jimmy and the group of SNCC field secretaries, we were working on the we the people side of this issue in the country. How do we become constitutional people in the country? How do we help the country in its struggle since its beginning to transform the concept of constitutional property into constitutional people? And in that struggle, right now, we're looking at the 50th anniversary of what happened in Mississippi. And there's an initiative that's going to take place that I would like to invite you to think about participating in. There are a group of people in Mississippi, Derek Johnson, who's head of the NAACP there, and Hollis Watkins. Hollis was a young teenager in Mississippi when I first met him. And he has stayed in Mississippi and currently heads up the Mississippi veterans of the Civil Rights Movement. They're going to try to do a ballot initiative, a We the People initiative, to collect 200,000 signatures next summer to get into the Constitution of the state of Mississippi the idea that there should be a quality public school education for all the young people in the state of Mississippi. And the little event that I talked to you about, the grease gunning, apparently we were attacked with a grease gun, which acts pretty much like a machine gun. And you remember 1963 was not a good year for this country. And the event kicked off for us 1963 and was part of a series of events which changed the trajectory of the Mississippi theater of the Civil Rights Movement and led to Freedom Summer. After Jimmy caught that bullet in his neck, SNCC regrouped to converge on Greenwood, and black sharecroppers lined up at the courthouse to demand their right to vote. SNCC field secretaries were arrested, and Burke Marshall, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights under Robert F. Kennedy, removed our cases to the Federal District Court in Greenville and sent John Doerr to be our lawyer. From the witness stand, I looked out at a courtroom packed with black sharecroppers from Greenwood, hushed along its walls, packed onto its benches, and attended to the question put by Federal District Judge Clayton. Why is SNCC taking illiterates down to register to vote. So sharecropper illiteracy was the subtext of the right to vote. Basically, our answer was, well, the country can't have its cake and eat it too. It can't have denied a whole people access to literacy through its politics and then turn around and say, well, you know, you can't do politics because you're illiterate. So we actually won that struggle. We didn't win it because we marched. Yes, we marched from Selma to Montgomery. And yes, that march created a climate so that Johnson could push the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But that Voting Rights Act has an enforcement provision, one which was just gutted by the Roberts Court. That enforcement provision had to be vetted in the House Judiciary Committee. And the argument and the evidence didn't come from the march. The argument and the evidence came from the court cases, like the one that we were there in Greenville, particularly Judge Wisdom's decision in the 1963 court case, U.S. v. Louisiana. So the work that SNCC field secretaries were doing helped the Justice Department to change its strategy. Instead of going after individual registrars, it went after whole states. So it filed suit against the state of Mississippi and the state of Louisiana. And if you look at the interrogatories in the suit against the state of Mississippi, there's an interrogatory this thick where the Justice Department looks at education resources that were provided after Reconstruction right down to 1961, 62, 63 by the state of Mississippi for its white students vis-a-vis its black students. And they didn't win that argument with Mississippi, but they got a strong dissent from one of the judges who were on the panel from the Fifth Circuit, Judge Brown out of Texas. They did win the argument for the state of Louisiana, and I would recommend that it be part of the history that you're trying to teach. Judge Wisdom's decision that he handed down less than a month after President Kennedy was assassinated in Baton Rouge, and basically said, we can no longer leave it up to the state of Louisiana to be the judge of whether or not people are to register to vote. It has to be removed to the federal system. And what he did was cite the whole history of the state of Louisiana vis-a-vis its black people. So I do the work with the Algebra Project. I think of it as a legacy of the civil rights movement. And Jim, please help me with time, right? So give me a signal. How am I doing?
You're doing very well. You could another as long as you want.
Okay, I'll take 5 minutes. So the Algebra Project is asking a question related to the issue that the judge raised. Why are you taking illiterates down to register to vote? We're asking a question of the country, and we've been working really hard on a particular piece of the education problem, which is what would it mean for the country to have a standard for the kids at the bottom? What would it mean to have a standard around their math education for the kids at the bottom? And yes, there's a conversation about the achievement gap, but quite frankly, we think it's a meaningless conversation because even if they reach the level of achievement that is listed, currently they leave high school and they're not ready to do college math for college credit. So we have been raising the question with ourselves and with our young people that we work with, what would it mean to have a standard in the country which says that the kids at the bottom leave high school ready to do college math for college credit? Right? So we've been working real hard on the what to teach and how to teach it so that that could actually happen, right? And so those are the two things that I would like to leave with you. One is a we the people question. I think the country really needs a constitutional right to a quality public school education. The Rodriguez case, 1968, Mexican Americans, San Antonio, walk out of high school, march on their school board, demanding better facilities, better teachers. It ends up, the mothers go to court. It ends up in the Supreme Court, 1971 or 73. Powell is the Chief Justice. He says, look, you can't come to the federal district courts for relief because there's no substantive constitutional right to an education in this country. So now the country has 45 cases in 45 states. Goodwin Liu, who is on the Supreme Court in the state of California, has written several articles telling the country, look, you can't solve this issue state by state because the biggest discrepancies are not within states, they're between states, right? So we have a big problem in the country. What I think we need is a we the people force that decides it wants to talk about the problem, right? We don't have conversations in this country about things that we're not ready to do something about, right? So we need to have a conversation, I think. Are we mature enough in this country to have a conversation about a constitutional amendment that ensures a quality public school education? Because look, the states don't have the money and the cities don't have the money. And yes, you don't want the federal government in it, but where are we going to have the conversation about what to do about the fact that we are a country that has an unannounceable education policy, which is we run failing schools and we rescue different categories of students by special programs. So yes, charter schools may help, but charter schools are just one system of rescuing people from a failing national public school system. So I want to leave those two issues with you. One is the issue of a standard, a different metaphor, not an achievement gap metaphor, but a standard. And the Algebra Project is working at that around the kids at the bottom, right? Can we get them working towards themselves a standard for their education which says they are going to leave high school ready to do college math for college credit? And then this larger issue of a constitutional amendment, which we are working on this summer in Mississippi with the Mississippi State Constitution. And we're hoping that if we can get something passed there, that it might serve as a wake-up call around the country. So, thanks.